Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Health Animated. On this podcast, we strive to make health information accessible to everyone. My name is Alex.
And I'm Danielle. To our returning listeners, thanks for your ongoing support. And if you're new, welcome to our podcast. We hope you stick around. So Alex, I think I'm not alone when I say when we started 2021, I was really hopeful. But I think this week has been really tough, and it's kind of been hard to find a silver lining in the last week. I mean, we've witnessed absolutely heinous events at the Capitol with the riots. There's been just a tragic plane crash in Indonesia. And there's just a lot that's going on in the world right now that seems to be beyond our control.
Yeah, definitely witnessing a lot of sad news these days, and it's really hard to avoid it and not let it get to you and impact your mood. We are definitely living in strange times, as we said in 2020, and now I think 2021 is just a continuation of what's been happening with 2020. Looking at the pandemic, we're still in the middle of it. In Canada, our case counts continue to rise, and even within BC, where we're from, our public health officials have extended our restrictions. And personally, January is not one of my most favorite months. And to combine it with the fact that we're still in the middle of a pandemic and with all the world events that have been happening just this past week, it's to no one's surprise that some of us might be experiencing a dip in our mood. Some people call this phenomena the January blues.
Yeah, and I think we recognize that it's a tough time for everyone, and that's actually why we wanted to talk about well-being for this episode of the podcast. So we want to provide some tips on how you can take care of yourself and improve your well-being in the time of COVID-19. So we actually did a 2-week trial back in December of the tips that we're about to share with you today, and we look forward to chatting about our personal experiences and our reflections on these tips. So let's get started.
I think that whenever we have conversations about mental health, it's really important to set the scene and to let people know that they're not alone in this. You know, this pandemic has been an isolating experience to many of us. And to no one's surprise, one article found that people had lower psychological well-being scores compared to before COVID. So some factors that were associated with higher risk of anxiety and depression during COVID are, number 1, higher social media exposure. So I know that I've been spending way more time on my phone during COVID than before COVID. I'm actually really scared to do this right now, but I'm gonna turn on my phone and okay. So get this, my daily average screen time, this is crazy.
You wouldn't tell me before this episode.
Is 4 hours and 22 minutes.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that I've been scrolling more than usual, but I definitely did not turn that feature on my phone because I didn't want to know. So thanks, Alex, for being brave and sharing.
Okay, the second factor is less family support.
This one also is probably to nobody's surprise. Personally, this pandemic has been the longest that I've gone without seeing my parents. And I know for so many that's the case. They haven't been able to see their parents, their sisters, their brothers, just their family. So I think that it's been very challenging and difficult for many.
Yeah, I think personally, I'm fortunate enough that I'm less impacted by the lack of family support. I live in a multi-generational household with my grandparents, my parents, and my sister and myself. So that luckily hasn't changed too much, but I can definitely appreciate how other people have missed spending time with the family. You know, they're not able to return home to celebrate the holidays, and it's just been tough all around. So the third factor is higher perceived stress load.
Yeah, I certainly have a higher perceived stress load. I mean, I think all of us do. I can't imagine that there's people out there that don't have a higher perceived stress load right now. Yeah, I mean, this has been a year where we haven't been able to travel. We haven't been able to go on those holidays. We don't have the same things to look forward to that we have in previous years. So we kind of all have to take a step back and re-examine what gives us joy and in these strange times. So my stress levels have been higher during this pandemic. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, there's definitely been more often than not peaks in my stress. And I feel like with this pandemic, our options for decompressing are a bit more limited, and we have to be a bit more creative in figuring out how to de-stress. The last factor is poor sleep quality. For me, one of the things that's been challenging is just going back to the screen time. I've been spending so much more time catching up with social media, and it's one of those things where I feel like when I spend time on my phone before sleeping, it stimulates me. And sometimes I do find myself having poor quality sleep and just thinking about all the different things that are happening in the world, always wondering about like, what if I get COVID, and just feeling really paranoid about, bad things happening.
Yeah, I think my sleep has not been amazing during this pandemic. In fact, during Black Friday sales, I actually bought myself a new fancy pillow thinking that that would help. Yeah, I would agree with you though. I think that just the overstimulation has an adverse effect on my sleep quality. And also to invest in a good night's sleep by trying to manage your screen time before.
I feel like that was directed at me, Danielle.
And me.
So just to complete the conversation, the other factors include poor self-rated health, lack of psychological preparedness, lacking knowledge of the pandemic, and lastly, not taking precautionary measures.
Yeah, I think I just can't imagine that anybody could have really prepared for this psychologically, this whole pandemic. I think this is something that nobody really saw coming. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. This has been by far the most challenging mental test for me. There's so many, it made me realize that there's so many things I take for granted that have really contributed to my mental health. Like, for example, seeing friends, hang out with them, talking to them on the phone, going out, like all these things that we normally perceived as like the extras in life actually spoke differently to me during the pandemic. Like, I realized that it's actually really important to have those social connections to stay well, stay healthy, and to feel normal.
Yeah. I mean, not to underplay it, but this pandemic will certainly be one of those times that we all look back at, and it will be written about in the history books. So we are, I think, in some ways totally vindicated for having all of the emotions and experiences that we have been having in this last year. That's why I think that this article that Alex found is really important, and that's why we really wanted to share it with you. So similar to how right now we're all observing the public health advice about, wearing masks, social distancing to limit the spread of the virus, we also need to focus on protecting our mental health. So Alex found an article called Psychological PPE During COVID-19. And this article was by Dr. Jennifer Russel and Françoise Mathieu. And in this article, they highlighted 4 tips to support our mental health. So we're going to jump right into it.
Okay, so the first tip is called secure the foundations. So this means actively thinking about taking care of our physical and mental health and building up that solid foundation. So during challenging and stressful times, I know for a fact that I sometimes don't acknowledge and take care of my foundations, and I'm guilty of neglecting it. So for example, instead of cooking a healthy meal at home, it's sometimes easier to just pick up my phone, open up Uber Eats, and just order something, order takeout. And it doesn't help that they're always coming up with all these promotions and coupons, because those really get me. Another example is exercising and going to the gym. Sometimes it's really easy to just skip exercising and make up excuses like I'm tired or I'm feeling lazy or just prioritizing other things. So with that being said, going back to our challenge, Danielle, how was your experience with this tip?
Yeah, so for me, just like you, I was not very good about taking that time to secure my own foundation. So yeah, I was also eating out a lot. So I tried to limit eating out to twice a week for dinner and once a week for lunch. So I know that's probably still a lot for most people that are listening, but for me, that was certainly an improvement. So in order to kind of achieve this, I started doing meal prep on Sundays, and I would usually pair it with calling home, checking in to see how my parents were doing, and cooking meals.
So Danielle, no, that's really, really awesome. Do you have any go-to meals?
Oh yeah, so I love making lentil stew.
Oh, that sounds perfect for this cold weather.
It's really good, yeah. And also, I'm Indian, so I love making like Indian food. So chickpea curry is like one of my go-tos because it's so easy and like protein filled and comforting. So Another thing that I tried to do as well is just exercise. So for me, I was really bad about this like earlier in the year. But I started to do like yoga every single day during the first week of the trial. I would say that I felt a lot better when I did it. I also started journaling about my experiences, and I realized that I like writing. And it's nice to just have like an outlet to introspect at the end of the day, because it kind of helps you to settle your mind and just get all of those things that you're thinking about on paper. But I did notice that it was very challenging to kind of incorporate self-care into my life without leaving work on time. So another thing I tried to do was to leave work relatively on time. So I think that it's something that I've like tried to do periodically throughout the year, just because I think it's really easy to stay at work later these days because, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's not that much to do when you go home. So I think a lot of people have been working late. I think a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of my friends that are working from home, they just work later because they're like, oh, what else are you going to do? But I think it's really important to just to make sure that you have that break at the end of the day and to have that balance. Yeah. What about you, Alex? Because you've been working from home.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, working from home has its pros and cons. Like, it's nice to be able to not have to commute for an hour, you know, each way. I will say, though, that I'm also guilty of blending my personal life and work life a lot more, especially when I'm working from home. It's just so much easier to stay that extra hour, that extra half an hour. Yeah, and one thing I want to pick up on as well is, as a society, I feel like we really value productivity, and there's almost this like celebratory feeling of being able to say like I'm busy all the time. People celebrate that idea and people encourage it. And so I think, you know, it's really important to take some time to practice self-care. Through the 2-week trial, I recognize that self-care is something that requires an active commitment. Sometimes in order to practice self-care, you have to be okay with letting go of other things and to prioritize that over other things that you might feel is more important. But as the tip suggests, self-care, taking care of our physical and mental health, is the foundation to everything else. In terms of myself, I think one of the things I focused on for this tip is just staying physically active. I've been pretty good at going to the gym twice a week. My gym classes are at 5:45 a.m. So part of the battle is going to the gym, and the other part of the battle is waking up that early. And I have to say, like, I'm not a morning person, but I've noticed a difference in my overall day. Like, I feel fresh after the gym, and it just starts off my day on the right foot. And the other piece is, because I haven't been able to see many of my friends at all, going to the gym is actually one way for me to have some sort of social connection with other people. I will also say that we actually have our own box and everything's measured out, and we're all, you know, safely distanced from each other. We all have our own equipment. We don't share anything. We disinfect. So it's allowed us to be able to work in sort of like a group setting while also being safe.
That's really awesome that you've been able to continue to go to the gym twice a week throughout this pandemic. In terms of waking up at 5:15 in the morning, I don't know how you could say that and then pair it with the fact that you're not a morning person, because to me that screams morning person. Yeah, for me, sleep will always win. Although we did start meeting in the morning, you and I, to start getting some of our podcast material sorted out. But that is the extent of my morning activities, I'll say. The second tip from the article is to reset and listen to your body. So a good amount of stress keeps us going. It keeps us balanced and alert. However, it's important to reset ourselves and return to that baseline so we don't feel burnt out. So listen to your body and look for ways to reset. This article kind of encourages people to reflect on your stressors and your coping mechanism. So an example that they cited in the article is that they limited news time to 10 minutes per day. Because I know that during this pandemic, it's kind of been news overload. A lot of it is not always the most positive news. So I think that is definitely something good to keep in mind for a lot of us. But Alex and I think we kind of looked at our own stressors and coping mechanisms as well during these 2 weeks. So Alex, do you want to share yours?
Every single day, I'm obsessively checking to see what our new daily count is. And I think that while it's important to stay in touch with what's happening within our region and within BC, I think sometimes it's important just to expose yourself to enough news to feel informed, but not feel overwhelmed and create anxiety for yourself. In terms of coping mechanisms, one way to quickly take breaks for myself is I would just go find my dog, Emmy, and just hang out with her even if it's for a couple minutes. Like, I'll play with her, I'll hug her, even though I don't think she likes to be hugged that much, but it works for me. I'll pet her and I'll give her treats. And that would just be like a short, like 2-minute interaction, and then I'll go back to work. But that small little break, I think, really helps me to recharge me and to keep me going for the rest of my day. And so I think these seemingly small things that you do for yourself, I think it can really add up and go a long way. The other thing that I've been doing is reading a book, not for educational purposes, not for work-related purposes, but just for my own enjoyment. I actually read a full book for the first time in 2020. It's kind of embarrassing to say that.
Whoa, wait.
It was just...
What do you mean? Explain. What do you mean for the first time? You've never read?
No. This is my first book that I read in 2020.
Oh, in 2020. Okay, not in your life. Thank you for clarifying. Okay.
I read books. But yeah.
What did you read, Alex?
It's called Love Boat Taipei. So it features a college kid who is Chinese American or Taiwanese American, and she spends the summer prior to going to university going to Taipei to reconnect with her roots and to experience the Taiwanese culture. And of course, during that time, she discovers love. She gets all wild and crazy. But anyways, it was a really easy read, and it was just nice to be able to pick up a book. And yeah, it's really been a really nice way to just decompress.
That sounds really nice. This one was hard because I think my stressors actually are when I'm too busy. So I think during this 2-week trial as well, I was pretty busy in my life, and this is not to glorify busyness, Alex, but just it was pretty busy. So I had just come off of planning a conference, and that an online conference, obviously. So there was a lot to kind of to do in the evenings. So trying to fit in self-care into these times, it was challenging. So I think for me, giving myself permission, my coping mechanism was giving myself permission to not do it all, to just take a step back and say that it's okay if you can't fit everything in. Yeah, I'm not the type of person that likes to have every single day filled up with stuff. I like having just time where I can do nothing and unwind. And that meant during the second week of this trial, I wasn't as good as at prioritizing my physical health, but I think it was needed for my mental health. So just kind of finding that balance.
I think you brought up a really good point about giving yourself permission to be okay with not doing everything you set yourself to do for that day. I often tell myself that, hey, anything that doesn't get done today, you always have another day to work on it. So don't feel like you need to give yourself that type of pressure.
No, I was just going to say, that sounds like a procrastinator's dream. But yeah, that's my mindset too. Why do today what you can put off to tomorrow?
Okay, at some point there's going to be a deadline.
Yeah, it's true.
All right.
Okay.
Let's talk about the next tip. So this next tip is to pick your battles. Life can be unpredictable sometimes, so it's really important to recognize that there's really 2 large buckets that you can categorize some of these things. So there are things that we can control, and then there are things that are outside and beyond our control. So while there might be stressors that are thrown into our lives, and like I said, sometimes they're unpredictable, what's really important is to see how we react to it. And that's the part that we can control, is our reaction. So Danielle, what was your experience with this tip?
So once again, I think this one was like easier said than done, but I do think that this tip is where I've kind of spent the bulk of my work, like during this 2-week trial, like focusing on this tip, because picking your battles is so important. There's an expression that my mom always used to say: if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes worrying about it. And I think it's really important to just evaluate what is in our circle of control and what's not. So this has been a year where we're not able to do the things that we normally do, right? We're not able to travel, see friends, see family. So I think under the surface, we all have this kind of baseline level of stress that's just sitting there. So I think when it comes to like work and volunteering, things that normally would not feel stressful are feeling more stressful during this time. So I think just recognizing that when you pick your battles is really important, because it's probably not just you that's experiencing higher levels of stress than normal. It's probably everybody else as well. So I think just recognizing that and being patient with people and being patient with yourselves is really, really important. So during these couple of weeks, what I've done is I've had conversations with others to establish an understanding about how we work together, and just taking a step back from things where I realize that I've overcommitted myself and giving myself permission to feel like that's okay. Yeah, what about you, Alex?
Okay, so during this past month, one of the things that my parents have decided to embark on was to renovate the kitchen. I know, of all times, we decide to just add extra stress to our life. And they actually hired one of our family friends. And let me just preface it by saying that they actually did a really, really good job with my own condo's renovations. We really think that their work is really good. And I also want to put it out there that we really appreciate all the efforts that were made and the amount of time that they've been dedicating to helping us make our kitchen our dream kitchen. But of course, with any sort of renovation project, there's always going to be a bit of stress. So during the renovations, things really started to heat up between my mom and my family friend. Like, my family friend was getting really annoyed that she was asking all these questions and constantly pestering him about, why are we doing this? What's the next step? Could we do something else? So he was complaining that my mom was constantly changing the plans. And then for my mom, she felt like the quality of work that was being done was not really up to her standards, because my mom has like super high expectations. And so between the two of them, it got to a point where one day things just blew up and my mom cried in front of him, and I was there as well. My sister was there, and it was just really tough. And it was just really unfortunate watching her go through that. It was very upsetting, and it was awkward too, because I wanted to make sure that I'm supporting my mom, but at the same time, showing respect to our family friend. And so what I did was I had to remind my mom that, hey mom, like, these are some of the things that are out of your control. The work has already happened. He already explained to us that it's not possible to just undo the work without creating way more extra work. So I told my mom, let's just let it go. Let's take a step back, give ourselves some time, and we'll revisit the conversation again. So what ended up happening was my mom and I sat down, walked through all the things that were imperfect according to her eyes, and we came up with a plan to navigate it ourselves. And we kind of made it into this like mom and son project where we work together to fix up and patch up all these little things. And at the end, I think my mom was very pleased with the overall renovations. And to me, it really taught me a lesson that, hey, these are some of the things that we can't control. We're not experts in renovating, but what we can control is in how we react and what we do within our powers to make things better. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from this example and this tip.
Aw, that sounds like it was a good mother-son bonding experience for you guys. And I think, you know what, honestly, it's true. Like, all of us are feeling this baseline level of stress that bubbles beneath the surface. And I think that just being mindful of those and just taking a step back is always a good thing during this time.
Okay, Danielle, do you want to take us through our last tip?
Okay, so the last tip is connecting with others, creating an emotional village. Having the support of those around you really helps to cope with the day-to-day challenges. So one way to refuel your social meter, so to speak, is to connect with others. Obviously, the definition of connection during this pandemic has shifted from what we once knew. So that means going for virtual coffee dates, having virtual hangouts, or going for walks with your friends, which right now in BC, those are really the only two ways of socializing. at the beginning of this trial, I was just coming off a period of busyness in my life, planning that online conference. So I hadn't really made a lot of time for my friends and family. So the day that it was done, I reached out to my family, my friends, and I started just scheduling a bunch of virtual hangouts and walks with friends. So I thought that was really important. So the first thing I did the Sunday after the conference was Skype, or Zoom rather, Zoom one of my friends that I hadn't talked to in probably close to a year.
Oh my goodness.
So he was living in the UK. So yeah, so he was already kind of far in, time zones and whatnot. So he was back in BC, and it was really nice to catch up with him and just recharge. Yeah, and then the next person I hung out with was a friend who I hadn't seen in 3 months. We went for a walk together, masks on and all, and we got a lot of steps in. So I will say that the new guidelines right now have really encouraged you to get out and get walking. So I think we had like 20,000 steps. We did a really nice big walk and along the seawall in Vancouver. Yeah, but I think it's just so important to recharge your batteries. And like for me, daily, I always usually call my family when I'm walking home from work, because it's a nice way to just get my exercise in and also just check in and see how they're going and have that support from my family. Yeah, what about you, Alex?
Mm-hmm. So this one I think was a bit more of a challenge for me. I think I started off strong. So at the beginning, I was very committed in, checking in on my friends and mostly just phoning them. Like I feel like phoning is so much better than just like texting. So I made it an effort just to give them a call. I know sometimes it's easy to just like let time pass and not nurture these friendships, and I recognize that it's something that I want to continue to be better at, because when I do connect with my friends and talk to them, it's just such a nice reminder of the supports around you, and like you said, refueling that social meter. One of the things that I enjoy is playing games. So we actually had one of my friends organize a games night on Zoom, and so we played Jackbox and Among Us. And then I guess the last thing that I think this was like a byproduct of starting a podcast with you is, and I think you alluded to this earlier as well, is we've been spending a lot more time with each other. Even though when we do meet, it's about, working on our podcast, working on Health Animated. We do spend a lot of time just catching up with each other, asking the really important question of how you're doing. And you've actually become such a huge part of my social village, and I'm really, really grateful for all the support you've given me. And yeah, I'm just so blessed to have you in my life. And it's kind of crazy that we start off as just pharmacy classmates, pharmacy friends, and yeah, I think you've been such an amazing friend, and yeah, just really being part of that my village. And yeah, hopefully we'll be friends for life, and we'll keep doing this.
Alex, you're one of my best friends. And Leanne and Sharon, just so you know, I said one of my best friends. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that our meetings in the morning those helped actually recharge my social meter and get my day off to the right start. So I think it's been so important, and you've been a huge factor in helping my mental health as well during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Likewise. So guys, these are our 4 tips that we want to share with you. As you can tell from our experiences, it's not about being perfect with implementing every single tip. Some things will work for you and some things won't. It's really about experimenting and kind of seeing what works for you.
Yeah, the point of this is really just to develop that self-awareness and acknowledge the importance of taking care of your mind and your body. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Just continually recognizing that self-care is an active process and it requires a commitment on your end. The one thing I want to remind everyone is be kind to yourself. I know that we've been hearing that messaging from our public health officials. So Dr. Bonnie Henry, shout out to her. She has the toughest job in the world right now, and I really appreciate her composure, her approach to this entire pandemic. She's always remained calm, and one of the things she always says at the end is just to remind ourselves to be kind. And I want to do the same thing to those out there. Be kind to yourself because sometimes we can be our toughest critics. And so don't feel down if you have a bad day. It's totally normal. And just remember that it's important to spend time to practice self-care and to also practice self-compassion.
So another thing that I wanted to remind everyone about is if you or someone you know are experiencing difficulties with your mental health, please do reach out. There are a variety of resources available depending on where you live, but talking to your friends, your supportive family members, or your family doctor is a great place to start. So if you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you can share it with your family and friends. It would also mean so much if you follow our podcast. Don't forget to check us out on our various social media accounts by searching Health Animated. Bye for now.